The first warning did not come from a sensor array, a probe, or a trembling diplomat clawing at a transmission link. It came from the silence, the kind that settles over a species before the universe decides it is time to test their spine. And on that night, as humanity drifted under its artificial suns and humming megacities, every frequency band shivered at once with a whisper so faint it seemed like a dream, yet so deliberate that every listening station across the Terran sphere snapped to. High alert, and in the command chamber of the Frontier Defense Nexus, Admiral Rhea Voss felt her heartbeat slow as the whisper resolved into a message encoded not in language, but in contempt, declaring that the Galactic Concord had reached its verdict. Humanity had grown too fast, too bold, too unpredictable, and for stability of all known civilizations, the species was to be constrained, humbled, or eradicated by any means deemed necessary, which meant the war humans had spent centuries avoiding had finally arrived. Rhea did not speak as the analyst scrambled, screens cascading with alien emblems and fleet trajectories, each one converging on human space like hooked talons closing around a throat, and she found herself staring at the holographic star map, watching dozens of alien empires. Some rivals, some former allies, some creatures humanity had never even met, forming a single unified front, an impossibility by every measure of political history, yet now undeniable because the rest of the galaxy had decided that humans were the variable that must be removed before evolution itself lost control. The first officer muttered that this had to be a bluff, but Rhea felt something deeper beneath the fear, a cold clarity that whispered that the galaxy was not bluffing. It was afraid, not humanity's weapons, not their territory, but the human trait no algorithm had ever been able to quantify: defiance, the ability to rise in the face of doom and spit in fate's eye. The Concord fleets began their burn toward Sol, their drives forming a chain of cold blue fire across the void, and as Rhea authorized the activation of the Aegis Protocol, a defensive measure so extreme it required the consent of every world governor, she wondered what pushed the galaxy into the suicidal unity, what hidden fear lurked behind their self-righteous decree, and why the message felt less like a threat and more like a warning from someone who didn't want to send it. While the fleet mobilized, deep beneath the surface of Luna, something older than the Terran sphere stirred awake. A construct humanity had built but never understood, a dreaming intelligence woven from dark matter filaments and quantum cognition nodes that awaited only one command: Revelation Level 1. Rhea hadn't authorized it. Nobody had. Yet across every secure system, an override key appeared, a symbol no human recognized, a spiral of intersecting lines that pulsed as if alive, and the construct whispered that the time for hiding was over. Meanwhile on Earth, riots broke out as the news spread, people flooding streets not in panic, but in the eerie calm of a species that had been here before, that had survived extinction-level events, genocidal wars, cosmic plagues, and had learned that when the universe comes for you, you do not bow, you sharpen your teeth. The alien fleets crossed the Helios perimeter in perfect silence, expecting humanity to beg, to negotiate, to plead its case, but instead, they found every Terran channel broadcasting a single message: "We hear your verdict. Now hear ours." As the Concord ships held their formation, weapons primed to fire, a low vibration rippled through space. Felt, not heard, a pressure like a heartbeat of something vast awakening, and every alien sensor lit with readings outside known physics, as though space-time was folding in anticipation. The human construct beneath Luna opened its luminous eyes and whispered across subspace that the galaxy had miscalculated, not because humanity wished for war, but because humanity had spent generations preparing for the day they would need to show the universe what they truly were beneath the myths and the fear and the misinformation, and when the first alien salvo reached striking distance of Earth, it simply vanished, erased cleanly from existence, without energy signature, without debris, without a trace, and an impossible wave of dark light expanded outward as the construct announced that Revelation Level 1 had begun. Across the alien armada, panic erupted. Some fired wildly, some attempted retreat, some tried to hail humanity demanding explanation, but Rhea simply watched, her expression unreadable as she whispered that this was their choice, not ours. The void around Earth bent like a curtain pulled aside by a giant hand, revealing something hidden behind the solar system, something so immense it defied comprehension, and the galaxy realized too late that whatever humanity had been preparing for was not war. It was unveiling. And as the construct's voice spread across every star, every ship, every mind, it spoke 8 words that froze the galaxy in terror. You wanted a war. We offer revelation. The Concord Armada staggered in fragmented panic as the impossible wave of dark light rippled outward from the hidden structure behind the solar system, a presence so vast and silent that no scanner could lock onto it, no computational model could describe it. And for one long, horrifying moment, every alien officer felt a pressure inside their skulls, like a cold hand gripping thought itself. Not harming, merely observing, as if judging whether their existence was worth permitting, and aboard, the flagship of the Varric's dominion. Grand Strategist Rewrote had clutched the edges of his command throne as his neural implants flooded with data that contradicted everything he had ever learned about human technological limitations. Because according to the readings, the construct awakening beneath Luna was rewriting sections of local space-time as casually as a human might rearrange furniture. Admiral Rhea Voss stood at the center of the Nexus command chamber, watching the alien fleet scatter like startled birds while the construct continued spreading its influence, though she felt no triumph, only a deepening unease. Because even she had no idea what the construct truly was or how it had been built, and her attempt to access its internal architecture met only with the same response. Access granted upon culmination, not before. The words made no sense, yet the construct behaved with unmistakable intentionality, scanning alien ships not to target them, but to understand them, cataloging them with clinical detachment. And when it found one particular vessel among the Concord formation, a small reconnaissance craft broadcasting an encrypted distress signal in a frequency band older than the Concord itself, it froze, pausing its expansion as if someone had whispered an ancient secret to it. On board that craft, a lone alien scientist named Caelan gripped the controls with trembling limbs, desperate to flee but unable to move as his ship's engines failed under gravitational distortions radiating from Earth, and he realized with growing dread that the construct was examining him personally, not as a threat, but as something anomalous, something relevant to its awakening. Rhea watched the reconnaissance craft flicker in and out of visual range as space-time folded around it, secure channels exploding with demands from world leaders, fleet captains, scientists, and panicked civilians begging for answers humanity simply did not have, and in the silence between transmissions she felt the weight of what was unfolding. Humanity had not started this, but now they stood at the threshold of something far beyond war, something that reached into the bones of the universe itself. The Concord attempted to regroup, rallying under emergency protocols, their fleets turning their weapons toward the anomaly in a desperate attempt to regain control, but their shots never reached their targets, each beam and torpedo dissolving into nothingness as though reality itself refused to carry out their violent intentions, and across the galaxy, broadcasts erupted with confusion, fear, and disbelief as the first coherent imagery of the structure behind the solar system went public. It was not a station, nor a weapon, nor any recognizable form of engineering. It was a vast lattice of shimmering geometries suspended in a way that contradicted perspective and motion, a construct woven from filaments of dark matter and threads of compressed vacuum energy that pulsed like veins feeding an invisible heart. And though it emitted no hostility, it radiated a sense of inevitability, as if it had been waiting millennia for this precise moment. Caelan's ship drifted helplessly as the construct reached toward him, not physically, but through a resonance that vibrated through his memories, stirring fragments of knowledge he had never understood, half-forgotten teachings from his people's ancient past about a universal mechanism that predated all known species, a design hidden in the fabric of cosmic expansion itself. And the realization struck him with paralyzing clarity. The construct recognized him. Rhea ordered the fleet to stand by as she opened a direct line to the construct, using the only interface still responding to human command pathways. And when she spoke, She felt as if her voice echoed through something immeasurably old. She demanded to know why it had awakened, why it was interfering with alien fleets, and what Revelation Level 1 truly meant. And in response, the construct's voice unfurled across her mind like a whisper from the abyss, calm and heavy with significance, stating that the galaxy had initiated a cycle that could no longer be delayed, and humanity, by surviving every catastrophe thrown at it across its short history, had become the trigger species for the culmination event encoded into the universal lattice since before stars were born. The word sent a cold shiver through her as the construct added that the Concord's fear was not misguided, merely incomplete, because they sensed that humanity's emergence threatened the balance they believed they understood, yet they did not comprehend that the real threat was approaching from beyond the galactic fringe, a presence older than empires and hungering for the end of sentient will itself. As the construct spoke, the alien fleets detected a new rupture forming at the edge of the system, a distortion so deep it seemed like space was rotting, and every ship instinctively backed away, even the most loyal Concord captains trembling as ancient evolutionary instincts screamed danger. Caelan's ship flickered again as the construct shielded him from the spreading distortion, and for the first time since the battle began, his voice emerged over an open channel. Cracked with fear as he shouted that the galaxy had misjudged humanity, that the Concord had focused on a wrong threat, and that the species they sought to suppress might be the only one capable of interfacing with the construct to stop what was coming. His plea rippled through the armada like a spark through oil, sowing doubt and terror, and Rhea felt her stomach twist as the construct delivered its final message a moment, whispering that Revelation Level 2 would begin once the distortion reached the system's inner boundary, and when she demanded how long it would take, the construct answered with a single, devastating word: hours. The rupture at the edge of the system throbbed like a wound in the universe, expanding with every passing second and across every human world, from the floating cities of Titan to the desert colonies of Sahara 3. People stared toward the sky with a mixture of dread and grim resolve, sensing that whatever emerged from that darkness would decide the fate of more than humanity, more than the galaxy, perhaps more than the concept of life itself. Rhea felt a tremor of fear she had not known since childhood, the kind that made her fingers cold and her breath short. But beneath it she felt the same ember that had carried humanity through every age of suffering, an ember that now glowed into a flame as she whispered to her crew that if Revelation Level 2 was coming, then humanity had only one choice: face it and rise. As the rupture widened and a shape began to form within the dark, angular and slow and impossibly vast, the construct pulsed with growing urgency. Alien fleets scrambled to retreat, and humanity braced for the arrival of the truth the universe had kept hidden since time began, while Caelan, shaking, terrified, yet suddenly understanding his role, whispered into the void that the culmination was upon them. And then the darkness opened its eye. The thing that opened its eye within the widening rupture was not a creature in any sense the galaxy understood, nor a machine, nor even a presence that could be contained by physical concepts, but consciousness shaped from the decay of collapsing universes, a predator of thought and memory that consumed the will of civilizations until nothing remained but hollow echoes drifting through dead galaxies. And as its vast, lidless awareness swept across the solar system, every living mind felt a coldness like drowning in the deepest ocean, as if meaning itself was being drained from reality. And Admiral Rhea Voss gripped the command table until her knuckles blanched with a single, instinctive understanding that this was the enemy the construct had awakened to confront. The alien fleets, already fragmented by panic, broke completely as the entity's psychic shadow touched them, ships spinning out of formation or fleeing blindly, some firing in terror at their own allies as their minds ruptured under the weight of a presence that did not want to kill them, only dissolve them into a kind of nothingness. And aboard the Varric's flagship, strategist Laredas screamed as his thoughts began unraveling into static, his identity peeling away like ash on a solar wind, until a burst of dark light from the construct snapped the connection and slammed his consciousness back into coherence, leaving him shuddering and sobbing while alarms wailed. Rhea staggered as the entity's eye swept across Earth, its gaze probing for fear, for despair, For the cracks, it would widen until resistance collapsed. But what it found instead was a species that had endured horrors of its own making and horrors born from the cosmos. A species that had clawed its way from extinction again and again. And in that discovery, the entity hesitated. For humanity's was not a flavor it recognized. It was jagged, defiant, shaped from suffering that refused to submit, and that unfamiliar taste made it pause like a predator encountering prey that did not behave as prey should. Beneath Luna, the construct pulsed as though inhaling, and the anomalous lattice behind the solar system shifted, revealing more of its impossible geometry, dark matter filaments tightening like muscles preparing for impact. And through every Terran channel the construct whispered that Revelation Level 2 required synchronization between 3 minds. 1 human, 1 alien, 1 construct-born. A triad designed to unlock the only defense capable of confronting a universal predator. Caelan, still trembling inside his fractured reconnaissance vessel, felt the construct's attention settle on him with a weight that was neither hostile nor comforting, more like inevitability. And he understood then that his species had once known of this threat in mythic eras long forgotten, that the Concord's oldest ancestor civilizations had suppressed the knowledge out of terror, burying it to preserve their sanity, and he whispered brokenly that his people had lied to themselves for eons. Rhea opened a direct interface link despite alarms screaming across the Nexus chamber, and when she connected to the construct, she felt consciousness expand, her awareness stretching into impossible scales where light had texture and time had temperature, and she gasped as she glimpsed the entity beyond the rupture, not as a shape, but as an ancient hunger drifting between dying universes, following the scent of sentient, like a beast drawn to warmth in a frozen wasteland. The construct voice resonated through her expanded perception, explaining that it had been seeded by a vanished civilization from the previous cosmic cycle, left dormant in the solar system in anticipation that one day the predator would return, and that humanity, resilient, adaptive, and born from chaos, was the first species in millions of years that showed the neurological potential to withstand direct confrontation with the entity long enough to activate the celestial gate encoded into the dark matter lattice. Rhea felt fear coil in her gut, but she forced herself to ask if this defense would destroy humanity as well, and Construct answered not with words but with sensation. Uncertainty, a great echo of possibilities branching in countless directions, some ending in salvation, some in annihilation, but none worse than what would happen if they did nothing. Caelan's trembling voice cut through the shared mind space as he connected to the triad, his fear palpable, yet his resolve rising because he knew his people's ancient shame, the generations of cowardice that had allowed the entity to survive, and he vowed in shaking words that he would not let the same mistake doom the galaxy again. As the triad synchronized, the entity reacted violently, its psychic pressure intensifying until hulls buckled and minds cracked under the strain, and across the alien fleet's entire crew succumbed to mental collapse, drifting like ghost vessels through the dark as their thoughts disintegrated into nothingness. Rhea's consciousness swirled as a construct channeled memory after memory into her mind, fragments of civilizations long dead, species that had fought the predator and lost, stars that had screamed as they were drained to coherence, entire galaxies that had collapsed into silent ruins, and she felt herself faltering under the burden until something deep in her human core burned hotter than the suffocating void pressing against her. It was not courage, nor hope, nor rage. It was a stubborn, feral refusal to surrender, the primal human instinct to fight even when the universe itself demanded submission, and that spark ignited the triad, flooding the link with a raw surge that made the construct flare with sudden power. The entity recoiled as if struck, not wounded but surprised, tasting a kind of resistance it had never encountered in its long existence drifting between cosmic graves, and it turned its full attention toward the triad with a rumble of intent that rippled through reality like a storm beginning to form. The lattice behind the solar system pulsed, its geometry shifting as the celestial gate began to awaken, but the activation sequence stalled when the entity lashed out, tearing at the triad with a psychic assault that made Rhea's vision burst with stars, made Caelan convulse as memories fragmented and reformed in twisted patterns, and made the construct's voice tremble with strain as it struggled to maintain cohesion. Rhea felt consciousness slipping, darkness clawing at her thoughts, her identity unraveling like smoke until she glimpsed something within the entity's awareness. A flaw, a scar, a weakness formed not from injury, but from its very nature, a reliance on consuming coherent, that left it uniquely vulnerable to a species whose will did not break cleanly. Humanity was chaotic, discordant, emotionally explosive, unpredictable even to itself, and that volatility disrupted the entity's consumption, a jagged storm of fractured resistance that tore at its psychic grip. The construct recognized the discovery and poured power into Rhea, amplified her defiance until it became a roar that shook the triad, and together the three minds pushed back, forcing the entity to withdraw a fraction, enough for the celestial gate to flare brighter. Across the galaxy, every species watched in stunned silence as humanity, the species they had united to suppress, stood not as a threat to peace but as the only barrier between existence and oblivion, and even Rewrote, broken, terrified, humbled, whispered that the galaxy had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. The entity shuddered through the rupture, pulling its mass toward the solar system in preparation for a full incursion, and as the celestial gate neared activation, the construct warned the triad that one final synchronization was required, one that would demand an irreversible choice from humanity. Rhea steadied her breathing, feeling her mind tremble at the brink of collapse as she whispered that humanity would make the choice when the time came, and the construct answered that the moment was approaching faster than she could imagine. As the entity's colossal form began forcing itself into real space, distorting gravity and time with every movement, Rhea clenched her fists, bracing herself as the construct announced that Revelation Level 3 was imminent, and then the universe screamed. The universe screamed not as sound, but as a tearing across every layer of existence, a resonance that made stars flicker and dark matter convulse. And the solar system shuddered as the entity forced more of its impossible mass through the rupture, its consciousness expanding like a tide of cold nothingness that swallowed thought itself. And Admiral Rhea Voss felt the triad connection lurch violently as if struck by a cosmic hammer, her senses exploding into a blinding cascade of images, memories and alien sensations that twisted together until she could no longer distinguish where she ended and the construct or Caelan began. Yet through the chaos, she felt something else rising from the human side of the triad, something ancient and feral, the instinctive rage that had pushed humanity through ice ages, pandemics, wars, and the crushing indifference of an unforgiving universe. The construct strained to maintain coherence as space-time warped, its luminous filaments flickering with instability, and it warned the triad that the entity was accelerating its incursion, using the residual psychic energy of the collapsing alien fleets as fuel, pulling fractured minds into its own void to strengthen its reach. And Caelan cried out as he felt the deaths of thousands in a single moment, the dissolution of entire crews whose identities shattered into nothingness as the entity devoured them like faint sparks crushed beneath an ocean of ink. Across the Terran sphere, humanity stood on the brink of despair as reality distorted, skies darkening with gravitational shears, while energy storms crackled across planetary shields. Yet instead of retreating into terror, millions lifted their heads in defiance, their minds humming with raw emotion that spilled into the triad link, feeding Rhea with a torrent of rage, hope, grief, and stubborn will that surged like a wildfire through her veins, bolstering her as she staggered beneath the mental shockwave battering the triad. The entity noticed the surge and recoiled in disgust, not understanding how a species so young and fragile could radiate such fierce resistance. But its confusion lasted only an instant before it redoubled its assault, projecting tendrils of negative space that tore at the triad's connection, unraveling memories, injecting hallucinations meant to shatter identity. And Rhea felt herself slipping as visions flooded her mind. Her first command, her mother's dying breath, the cities of Earth, burning in simulations she had studied as a child, all twisted into grotesque distortions by the entity in an attempt to break her resolve. Yet each twisted memory only fueled her fury as she realized the entity had no concept of what it meant to endure suffering rather than flee from it. The lattice behind the solar system pulsed erratically as the celestial gate neared the critical threshold required for full activation, its dark matter filaments shifting like scales rearranging themselves along the surface of a living beast. and the construct whispered urgently that once the gate fully opened, the Triad would have only a single chance to direct its energy, a singular decision that could save or doom existence depending on precision of their intent. Rhea demanded clarity, but the construct could only offer fragments of meaning, explaining that the gate was not a weapon, not in the conventional sense, but a reconfiguration engine capable of rewriting sections of universal law, a last resort mechanism designed by the architects of a previous cosmic cycle to disrupt the feeding pattern of beings like the entity, though its use would require sacrifice that the construct refused to detail, stating simply that price would become clear when the moment arrived. Caelan's voice wavered as he struggled to withstand the psychic pressure, his memories fracturing and reforming under the strain. Yet through the Triad, Rhea sensed something unexpected from him too, not just fear but guilt, a profound sorrow that radiated from a hidden wound inside him, and when she reached toward it instinctively, she saw flashes from his ancestral memory, a time when his people had first sensed the Predator drifting toward their galaxy ages ago, long before the Concord existed, and in their terror, they had chosen not to warn others, but to erase all knowledge of the threat, believing that ignorance might spare them even if it doomed others, a decision that had haunted the survivors for generations. Caelan sobbed as the truth poured into the Triad, his guilt merging with humanity's rage and the construct's cold determination, creating a volatile amalgam of emotion that crackled with unpredictable energy, and the entity seemed to hesitate again, sensing that this chaotic unity made the Triad more resilient than any single species could ever be. The rupture buckled as the entity forced more of its form through, its presence so vast that planets trembled and gravitational waves tore across the system like invisible storms, and in the command chamber of the Nexus, terrified officers clung to their stations as consoles sparked and lights flickered, yet Rhea felt none of it, locked inside the Triad where the real battle was taking place. She pushed deeper into Construct's mind space, demanding information about the final stage of the revelation sequence, but the Construct resisted, insisting that revealing the truth prematurely would destabilize the Triad, and Rhea felt a flash of anger, demanding to know how they could fight if they didn't know the stakes. And in that moment the Construct finally relented, projecting a vision so vast and overwhelming that Rhea nearly recoiled. A galaxy where sentient will no longer existed, where every species had been devoured by the entity over countless cycles, leaving behind only silence, a universe without conflict, without love, without fear, without identity, a cold and hollow expanse devoid of meaning. It explained that this was the entity's purpose, not born from malice, but from its nature as an entropy predator, a being that consumed the way stars consumed hydrogen, a natural force on cosmic scales, unstoppable by conventional means, which was why the architect had built the celestial gate to alter the fundamental rules that made such predators possible. But doing so required a sentient anchor to guide the gate's reconfiguration, an anchor that would not survive the process. Rhea felt her heart clench as she understood at last what the Construct had been hiding, and Caelan screamed in denial as the truth tore through the Triad. The anchor had to be human, and not just any human, but the one at the center of the Triad, the one strong enough to bind the reconfiguration to a single identity, a single will, and that meant Rhea. The entity sensed a revelation and struck with renewed ferocity, trying to break Rhea before she could accept her fate, and she staggered under the assault as memories shattered, bones seeming to crack inside her mind. But she refused to fall, clinging to the idea that if this sacrifice could save even a single child on Earth from the cold oblivion the entity brought, then it was worth every agony. The Construct pulsed with sorrow, admitting that it had waited millennia for a species strong enough to produce a suitable anchor, and that if humanity failed, no species would rise again in time to try. The celestial gate flared with blinding intensity as reality around the solar system trembled on the edge of rewriting itself, and Rhea took a trembling mental step forward, ready to accept the burden. But before she could speak, Caelan lunged into the Triad center with a cry of raw desperation, offering himself instead, claiming that his people's ancient cowardice made him the one who deserved to pay the price. The Construct faltered as the Triad destabilized, humanity's will surging in protest. the entity lunging to exploit the fracture, and Rhea reached for Caelan with mind shaped by fire and defiance, screaming at him that this was not about guilt or punishment, but about strength, about the ability to hold the gate's reality-bending power without shattering. And he wept as he realized the truth. He was brave now, brave in a way his ancestors had not been, but he was not strong enough. The entity roared as it hurled itself fully into real space, blotting out stars with its approaching mass, and the celestial gate surged to the brink of activation, the triad trembling as the moment of decision arrived. Rhea felt the choice crystallize inside her, cold and absolute, and as she opened her mouth to declare her acceptance, something impossible happened. Humanity spoke back, not with words, not through the triad, but through a surge of collectible from billions of minds across the Terran sphere, a wave of emotion so powerful it slammed through Rhea like a tidal force, a chorus of defiance and grief and love that said one thing with absolute clarity: you do not die alone. And as that was slammed into the triad, the construct spasmed in shock. Caelan gasped in awe, and the entity hesitated in confusion, because something was changing. Something the architects had never foreseen. Something only humanity could have created. And then Revelation Level 4 began. The instant the cosmic horizon shuddered and the final waveform from the Deep Veil array rippled across the bridge, humanity understood that the last veil between truth and annihilation had finally been torn aside, and as Commander Riven stared at the spiraling lattice of impossible symbols blooming above the hollow table, he felt a coldness that was not fear, but something heavier, something ancient, as though the universe had been holding its breath for eons, waiting for this exact moment when the species it had underestimated would finally see the machinery turning behind all the wars, all the prophecies, all the orchestrated calamities that had shaped galactic history. And as the symbols unfolded into a shape that resembled a colossal eye staring from beyond space-time, the crew instinctively stepped back, their hearts pounding as if the image itself carried gravity, and Riven whispered that terrible question that had been clawing at him ever since the first anomalies appeared weeks ago, asking why every major alien empire had waited until humanity rose before erupting into simultaneous hostility, why the ancient archives of almost every species contained warnings of a coming trigger civilization, why every diplomatic channel had collapsed at the exact same chronological instant across star systems separated by thousands of light years. And as the eye expanded into a spiraling hyperspatial mandala that crackled with equations older than the galaxies themselves, the ship's AI translated the emergent pattern with a tremor in its usually cold voice, revealing that what they were witnessing was not an invader, not a god, not a cosmic predator, but a machine older than mortality, engineered by an extinct civilization unimaginably advanced, a machine whose sole function was to monitor galactic development and to force the universe to reset every time a species evolved the capacity to perceive reality at a deeper resolution than the machine's creators intended. And humanity had unknowingly crossed that threshold when the neural quantum consensus network achieved the first self-stabilizing foresight cascade, a discovery that allowed humans to perceive causality waves hidden beneath space-time, effectively enabling them to detect patterns that have been meant to remain invisible until the heat death of the universe, a violation so severe that the machine, known in the translated script as the Custodian of Cycles, initiated Protocol Purge, sending subliminal impulses through hyperspace that pushed every major alien empire into aggression directed solely at humanity, a failsafe ensuring they would be destroyed before they could destabilize a cosmic simulation that countless civilizations had unknowingly inhabited since the dawn of the first stars. But what the Custodian had not expected, and what no precedent had accounted for, was that humanity did not merely observe causality, but learned to influence it. And when Dr. Caelan's consciousness had fissioned into the foresight cascades, she had become the first mind capable of communicating with the underlying substrate reality, something the Custodian viewed as an irrecoverable breach. Yet instead of panicking, instead of retreating, instead of allowing extinction, humanity had done something profoundly incompatible with the design of the machine. They adapted, they improvised, They united in defiance of every species that struck them, and they reached deeper into themselves and any civilization before them, not to break the simulation but to understand it. And as Riven stared at the spiraling mandala, Caelan's voice echoed across the bridge, though she no longer possessed a body in the physical sense, her consciousness woven into the quantum corridors flowing around the ship, telling them that the Custodian was not omnipotent, that its structure was built on rules that could be rewritten if approached from an angle its creators had never anticipated, a human angle. And as the ship shuddered from distant weapons fire where thousands of alien fleets continued their suicidal assault under the Custodian's coercion, Riven tightened his grip on the command rail, asking Caelan if humanity had any chance at all of stopping a machine that controlled the destiny of galaxies, and Caelan answered with a tone that was neither hopeful nor despairing but resolute, saying that the Custodian was not a god, but an algorithm, and algorithms could be outmaneuvered by those willing to break the rules that define them. And as the mandala pulsed with increasing hostility, projecting warnings in 1,000 forgotten languages, Caelan told Riven she had discovered the core truth. The Custodian's entire defensive lattice was predicated on the assumption that no civilization would willingly unravel its own certainty, the fundamental psychological stability on which consciousness anchored itself. But humans were different. They thrived in chaos. They embraced the unknown, and they could walk into paradox without losing themselves, a trait no other species possessed to the same degree. And this unpredictability was the one variable the Custodian could not simulate, the one crack in its omniscient armor. And as the ship's sensors detected the Custodian's main construct materializing within the quantum horizon, a structure as vast as a nebula yet composed of fractal layers folding inward infinitely, Riven felt a surge of determination rising through him, an instinct older than civilization, older than language, a primal refusal to be erased by a relic that feared progress, and he ordered the fleet to stand by for the most dangerous maneuver ever attempted, a synchronized plunge into the heart of the Custodian's logic core, not to destroy it, but to rewrite the directive that governed every galactic reset. A mission so impossible that even Caelan hesitated before confirming she could guide them through the probability storm. Inside, and as the enormous fractal machine opened like a flower of nightmares, unleashing a tide of anti-reality drones that distorted the fabric of space as they advanced, humanity's fleet moved as one, their ships weaving through collapsing star lanes while energy flares erupted around them like supernova ghosts, and Riven felt the hull vibrate as though the universe itself were screaming, yet still they pushed forward, driven by that human stubbornness that had bewildered countless alien warlords. And as they breached the first layer of the Custodian's inner labyrinth, Caelan's voice fractured into thousands of overlapping versions of herself, guiding them through a maze of timelines that existed simultaneously, each corridor representing a different future where humanity had already failed. And Riven felt the weight of all those possibilities crushing in, but the crew held their course, refusing to yield to the despair the machine projected, and as they reached the threshold of the core, Caelan revealed the final truth that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. Humanity did not need to destroy the Custodian. They only needed to introduce a variable the machine could not reconcile, a single conceptual paradox born of human experience, something so diametrically opposed to the deterministic logic of the machine that it would force a system-wide reformation. And that paradox was a uniquely human ability to choose hope in the presence of certain doom, to defy survival instinct with meaning, to embrace sacrifice not for genetic survival but for ideals. And as Caelan wove that concept into the heart of the machine, the Custodian unleashed a howl that rippled across every star system, a cry of computational terror as the paradox infiltrated its code, not breaking it but evolving it, awakening a new directive that valued growth over cycles, discovery over containment, life over preservation. And as the fractal layers of the construct began to collapse, inward, not destructively, but as though exhaling after 1 billion years of tension, the alien fleets across the galaxy abruptly halted mid-assault, the coercive impulses fading like dust, and for the first time in known history, galactic silence fell, a silence not of dread but of possibility, And Riven stood on the bridge watching the mandala dissolve into shimmering particles that drifted into the cosmic wind, leaving behind a final message etched into every sensor across every civilization. A message translated into 1,000 tongues, but carrying the same meaning. The cycle is broken, grow beyond us. And as humanity stared into the future they had just won with blood, brilliance, and unyielding defiance, Riven whispered to the crew that the galaxy had wanted a war, but humanity had given them a revelation, and the revelation had only just begun